So I'm going to give a brief overview before David and John talk about the clinical trials that they've done on how we actually came to be doing the clinical trials. But I should probably also explain, which reminded me listening to Lisa, about our Ascend range. We actually have two components to the Ascend proteins. There's what we call the Ascend Elite proteins, which are the ones that all have the clinical research to support them. So they're the ones that are novel to Ascend, and only Murray Goulburn makes them. And then we have what we call the Ascend Sport range. So that's like the whey protein isolates and the caseins like Lisa was talking about. So we've done a distinguish between the two, that something that goes into our elite products, which is the ones in black, we absolutely verify and we've done clinical trials on them. So we're not prepared to put something in those containers and use somebody else's scientific evidence. So I'm just going to spend maybe 5 minutes just talking about how it all started, what we learnt along the way, because we actually learnt some pretty interesting things, and then where did we get to, and then possibly give you a glimpse of where we're going to as well. Now, Stephen's already given you a good introduction to Murray Goulburn, so probably shouldn't stand in the middle of it either. So I won't probably do that, but he touched on the fact that some of the processing technologies we've been using for at least 20 years are really novel. We were one of the first people in the world to actually make whey protein isolates, and it's not something that people hear about very often. And we've been exporting them to the USA in particular for 20 years, and there's I don't know if any of you remember that Cathy Freeman actually got caught bringing whey protein isolates back into the country from the US. That was actually our WPI in the can, and that's how she actually was able to bring it in. So when we started up MG Nutritionals, we started up a very large research program looking for new and novel things from milk. We knew from the scientific evidence that there was lots of really interesting components in milk, and we wanted to concentrate on discovering them and then doing clinical trials. So we actually haven't only just done work on sports nutrition, we've also focused on bone health and weight management. But it's probably the muscle products that we've done the most research on, and they're the first ones to come through the pipeline, but we have some really interesting products in the other areas as well. And we've combined that science with our really novel manufacturing techniques. Because we have the very large amounts of milk to process through our factories, we can actually extract really minor components out of milk quite cost effectively. So how we went about this discovery program was we actually took milk and we broke it up into many, many different ways that we could. So we broke it up into tiny little fractions, we hydrolysed it, we did everything that we could think of, and we had well over 1,000 fractions, and I had 600 hydrolysates alone, and we put them through high throughput screening on muscle cells trying to look for something novel. And we focused mainly on muscle development and inflammation as to assist with recovery. And then once we found some interesting hits, as we called them, so we screened all these 600 or 1,000 different components, some looked interesting, then we took them through and discussed them with David and John, and David and John completed human clinical trials for us. Or in the case of what David's going to present, he actually came with the idea to us, and we actually had the product that matched, and we go, let's have a look at that, and we did. So I'm just going to give you a bit of a taste of some of the data. So this is just one example of this is looking at inflammation. So these are all whey protein hydrolysates. So you can see here we've got a couple that have actually had reduction in inflammation. So they're the ones that we began to have a look at to take to human clinical trials. And those assays that we used after we'd done the clinical trials and found that we actually had some pretty amazing results, which you're going to see, we actually used those assays to convince ourselves when we were scaling up to manufacturer that what we were making was still bioactive. And in the first place, that didn't happen. And so we actually had to tinker with our manufacturing process to make sure that what we were putting in the can was bioactive, and we did that by putting the products into these cell assays. And then we thought, well, that's pretty unique. Maybe we should tell our customers that we've actually verified that that's bioactive, and that's how we've come up with the name BioAssured. So that's a QA tool that we use, that we make sure that that product works. As Steve said, If that product doesn't work for you, we're not going to get repeat sales. So we can't afford for it not to work. And how we do that is both on using the cell assays and also looking at the different peptides and whey proteins that are in the product to actually make sure that they're all exactly like that first product that we've done the clinical trials on. So if you see that on the can, that's what that means. And we think that's a fairly unique proposition in terms of us guaranteeing that it will be active. So after we did this, I thought, well, I better have a look at some of our competitors' samples because I'd hate it if they started doing the same thing and they got better results than us, which was good that they didn't. So this is actually some of the competitors. I just wanted to highlight this because this is again a measure of inflammation. I just got 4 samples here. None of these are our products. Ours give a much lower result. But I just wanted to show you this one here, which is actually pro-inflammatory, which I found really interesting. It actually caused an inflammation reaction. So this was, I took some hydrolysates off the market, off the shop, and tested them, and this is what I found. And then I went back to the original data and I looked at all that, and about 50% of those 600 hydrolysates that we did, half of them were probably had an increase in inflammation rather than a reduction. So there's some really interesting things we're starting to learn about what you're buying, because it's not always as simple as you would think. So what we're told now is that hydrolysates work because they're already pre-digested and they go into the bloodstream faster. That might be the case for this product, but it's going to cause a lot of damage along the way. So you just got to be a little bit careful as we're getting into more sophisticated products that you know what you're getting. So I just thought I would share you with that because I found it really interesting. So from all this data, we've done the clinical trials, which you're going to hear about next. We've launched the elite proteins, which have all the clinical data to support. So we have 3 products, and 2 of which you're going to hear about tonight. But just to give you a taste of what might be coming in the future, this is inflammation again. This is a product that we can only make in the test tube at the moment, so we can't scale it up in the factory. But just to give you an idea that we can really, there's some really amazing things in milk that we're trying to pull out and will hopefully become a part of the Ascend range in future. So that's where I'm going to finish off. And I'm going to introduce you to John Buckley from the University of South Australia, who did the initial research on the recovery product, and that uses an ingredient that we're calling NatraBoost XR. So when John refers to that, then you'll know it's the main ingredient of that product. Only sucralose and flavour is added. Thank you, John.
Thanks, Michelle.